Hey guys, what's up? Welcome back here to this week's edition of Advanced Bass Fishing, and really appreciate you guys making some time to check the video out. I know it takes a little bit more time out of your day to watch these longer videos, so really appreciate it. Guys, today I've been wanting to do this video for a while. We're gonna sort of have a wide-ranging discussion just on bass. I wanna talk about bass, just what they do, what they're like, their moods, their personality, some of the habits that they have. This is something we could talk for a week about, but I sort of wanted to give you guys sort of like some type of a detailed foundation on just on how bass live from their day-to-day lives, how they operate from season to season, a little bit about their personalities, because they're a complex creature. A lot of people don't give bass credit. They think they're a little pea-brain, simple, fish. But guys, they have been on this planet for millions of years. You don't sustain as a species for that long by being stupid. They're adaptive, they evolve quickly, they learn from their mistakes really quickly. They're a fascinating creature. They're an apex predator in the fresh water. And we're just gonna talk a little bit, just a wide-ranging discussion on bass. So I think by the time the video gets done, you'll come away with this with a lot better understanding about what your quarry is all about when you go bass fishing the next time. Also, guys, just a quick invitation out there. If you guys like the content here of Advanced Bass Fishing and you want to give something back for the information you're getting here, the best thing you can do, guys, we talked about it, is if you just use and bookmark my Tackle Warehouse link for all your tackle purchases. If you guys do that, the channel gets a small percentage of anything you purchase. So that's just a great way to give back, and using all of our other links, and just subscribe to the channel. If you guys just do that, that's another way to really help out. So I really appreciate that. Okay, guys, so one of the things that you'll notice about really good bass anglers, guys that are just sort of like, just way above average, is they are students of the fish, and they really are fascinated, and they want to learn more about the bass movement and behavior. And if you guys have watched many of my other channels out there, I talk a lot about most bass anglers are not students of the fish. They're out for the quick fix. They want something where they can watch a little video and somebody tells them a secret lure color or a bait they need to use, and they go out there and try it and catch fish. It's almost like they want a quick route to success. But in fishing, if you're gonna really, really get to that next level, and you're gonna really become truly a great angler, you have got to really discipline yourself to learning and having this lifelong experience about knowing and understanding bass on an intimate level, because that's the only way that you're gonna get better. And it's a fascinating study, because as bass anglers, I always put more emphasis on what I glean from bass movement and behavior on anglers over like biologists and fisheries people. People that fish, that have been fishing for decades and decades and decades, they simply know more. It's like you cannot take do a study or a creel survey or whatever and expect to understand bass on a really, really deep level like anglers can, that have really put the dirt time in on it. So don't underestimate, how knowledgeable that you can get, by studying fish. So anyway, let's sort of get into this as far as how I want to approach this. One of the things about bass is like, there's a lot of misconceptions surrounding what bass do and how they live. It's like, and a lot of it is mysteries. It's still a mystery to this day about how bass fail quick and learn to adapt and survive. But from the time that a fish is born, it's like from the time that they are hatched out, their odds of getting to just being a 2-pound bass are incredibly rare. It's like they have to overcome just astronomical odds about dying or getting eaten or predatory or whatever just to get to 2 pounds. It's like, that is quite an accomplishment. So if you catch a 2-pound bass, and as those size of those fish get bigger, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 pounds, every weight class, or as that bass gets bigger and older, that is such a special fish, because that fish is above average. It's smart, it learns quick, it doesn't make many mistakes, it can't afford to make any mistakes. So that's one of the things that's really fascinating to me about bass. It's like, even when I catch a 1.5 pound or 2-pound bass, there's something special about that fish being really smart. And here's some things, what I sort of want to do in the video is I want to share with you guys some things that I've learned about bass over the years, as far as just what they do and how they operate and all that type of stuff. To me, it's like when you're talking about catching fish and, you know, the things that actually determine what or if a bass bites your lure, first of all, you have to consider, and one of the things that to me I always look at is what causes that bass to bite the lure. And from my experience, and all the stuff I'm going to share with you guys today is from my own personal experience. From my own personal experience, there's two things that really stand out about bass more than anything else. Number one, they're very opportunistic. You know, they take an opportunity when they get it. And number two is they feed at night a lot. I think that most bass, the majority of the feeding, active feeding, where they're out hunting and they're out looking, actively pursuing something to eat, is at night or under low light conditions. One of the things that I've noticed about bass is if you catch bass during the daytime, a lot of times you're not catching a bass simply because it's out looking for food and it's hungry. It's like you're capitalizing on all those survival mechanisms that have allowed bass to survive because of the predatory nature. And that predatory nature that they have are things within their being that causes them to go after food based upon things like reaction instincts. We've all seen this as far as how you can get bass to react to lures based upon working them a different way or working them faster or slower. That's a big part of it. Another part of it is curiosity. A lot of times fish will bite something just because they're curious. They don't know what it is. A lot of times it's competition. There may be other fish in the area. The fish may not be hungry whatsoever, but there's a competitive instinct within a bass that causes them to try to get a piece of prey or whatever it is, your lure or a crawdad or a shad, if there's other fish around. A lot of it is just is factors that don't have anything to do with them actually being hungry. So that's one of the biggest challenges that you're going to have as a bass angler, is trying to trick a bass to bite that you're fishing for most of the time that is not hungry. So that's a whole nother ball game there, because when you're talking about trying to trick a bass into biting that's not hungry, that's when you're dealing with different lure profiles, different colors, different retrieves, all the subtle things of bass fishing that you do have control over. That's one of the things, that's why bass fishing, I say, is the most difficult sport in the world, is because all of what I'm saying here, it's theory to a certain extent, because although I do get reproducible results in some of the things I just told you, sometimes you don't. I'll give you guys a prime example. Let's talk about this. One of the most puzzling things about bass behavior I've seen is if you've ever observed a bass in clear water, like say a bass, water's real clear and you see this bass cruising down the bank. Now, I don't care what time of year it is. If you see a bass cruising down the bank, he's just swimming down the bank. If you've noticed, usually one or two things happen. When you cast to that fish, if you try to cast to that fish, as soon as your bait hits the water, that fish will dart off 100 miles an hour and like you spooked the fish. And other times you'll throw that, well, actually there's three different things. Other times you'll throw your bait in there and they come over to the bait like they're interested in it, but they don't bite it. And then other times you throw a lure in there that you can see this fish coming and they try to get it and attack it as quick as they can. I've seen all three situations thousands of times, thousands of situations just like that. And that to me is one of the biggest mysteries. What makes one bass, and I've seen it in the same day. I've witnessed this multiple times in the same day. What is it that makes one bass spook away from your lure and makes the next bass attack that lure? That's one of the mysteries of fishing that we have. And it sort of goes back to another thing. And one of the most, fascinating things that I have seen as far as that come with forward-facing sonar, my buddy Johnny Schultz, who's, in my opinion, the top offshore fisherman in the world, he was relaying something to me that really, really was fascinating. Not that I condone LiveScope, but I don't. I think it would be a great tool in the hands of fisheries managements. But one of the things Johnny was telling me about, he said he was fishing when it first came out a year and a half ago or something, and he found this, there was a school of shad that he could see on that LiveScope, and there were some bass following this school of shad. There were like 2 or 3 bass following this big school of shad. And Johnny spent the day following the school around. And he said what would happen is the school of shad would just be swimming out in open water in the middle of the lake. and the bass would just be around the school. They weren't doing anything. They were just following the shad. And he said once, about every couple hours or so, all of a sudden the bass would just charge into that school of shad, grab a couple shad. The school would freak out and scatter a little bit. And then within the next couple seconds, the school of shad reformed and the bass dropped back in their same position and just started following the shad again. It's like that was their grocery store. That school of shad was their grocery store, and that predator-prey relationship almost like was understood. It's almost like the shad understood that was their role, and the bass were not going to be overly gluttonous. It's just like it worked for them. So that's one of the big things that I've seen about the feeding instincts of a fish, is that sometimes the fish just don't want to feed whatsoever. So when you're dealing with bass that don't want to feed, that's when you really have to step it up to the next level and try to generate a strike. And that's one of the things we talk about a lot here on the channel, is how to generate strikes from inactive bass, which is, a lot of different, variables to that. Anyway, here's some other things I want to talk a little bit about bass as far as in relationship to different times of the year. Now, one of the things that you're going to find out about bass in general is that the techniques and the approaches that you use for bass fishing are dependent upon a couple different things. They're dependent upon the water clarity and the water temperature and the water level. Those three factors like that determine so much about where bass are at and the techniques that they're going to bite under. And what I want to do here is I sort of want to go through all 4 seasons of the year and sort of tell you a little bit about what bass do and what you can expect out of them, and some of the things that I observed about bass. Some of the myths that I've broken on my own, and other people's have broken it too. So let's talk a little bit let's start out in the winter time of the year. Biggest misconception about winter fishing there was forever was that fish just are not as aggressive in the winter. They get inactive, they slow down, and they don't bite as good. I remember back when I first started bass fishing in the 70s, nobody fished in the wintertime because they just thought the fish they shut down. And there were a few guys out there that would take like a little hair jig or a jigging eel, and they'd get out on bluffs, and they'd work it like a snail, and they'd catch a few doing that once in a while. But as time went by, we realized that bass feed all year long. They don't stop feeding in the wintertime. They can be just as aggressive and just as active in the wintertime as any other time of the year. I've had some of my best days of fishing here in Missouri when the water temperature was in the upper 30s, 37, 38, 38 degree water, Stockton Lake, Table Rock Lake. I've had great days in super cold water. So the water cannot get cold enough for the fish to turn off. You can even catch them through the ice. I think the Massachusetts state record largemouth was caught through the ice, like a 15-pounder. So from that standpoint, don't ever think that there's a time of year the fish aren't going to bite. One of the things I found out about bass behavior is that they are far more active in the wintertime than what we give them credit for, and they will chase a lure a lot faster than what you think they will chase a lure. It's like the preconceived notion in wintertime fishing is you have to slow down and fish your jerk baits really slow. You have to fish small little swim baits. You have to fish spoons. You have to fish small finessey stuff really slow. Now, there is an element of truth to that you do have to slow down a little bit in cold water. The bass is a cold-blooded creature. Their metabolisms do shut down, not shut down, but they do slow down, but they don't slow down as much as what you think they would. Now, I'll give you guys a prime example of how I finally figured this out myself. About 10 years ago, I was fishing down at Table Rock. It was January, it was middle of the winter, cold as heck. It was in the 20s out, freezing cold. And I was fishing my jerk baits, super slow, letting them pause for a long time. And I was catching a few, not ripping them by any means, but I'd caught like maybe 10 fish, over the course of 4 or 5 hours, which was pretty decent, catching a few fish. And then finally, about 2 o'clock in the afternoon, I got hung up on a piece of submerged timber. Like my jerk bait was down really deep. And I remember I jerked the bait super hard, like I popped it really hard trying to get it off of there, and that lure popped off the piece of timber I mean, it darted super fast. And it's like when that lure came off of there and moved like super, like as fast as you could possibly move that jerkbait through the water, about a 3-pounder slammed it. And it's like, I couldn't believe it because the water temperature was like 43 degrees. And I'm talking this bait was moving. And that fish still got the bait. It didn't get the bait while it was stopped. It got the bait actually as I was jerking it really hard. So it actually had, the fish had to accelerate at a super high rate of speed in order to catch that bait. And guys, I started doing that the rest of the day. I started throwing that jerk bait out there and getting it down deep, and I started ripping it hard. And I wound up catching like, I don't know, 8 or 9 fish doing that. And that to me, that completely blew away all my misconceptions about having to work a lure slow. What it did tell me, and one of the things that you need to remember in bass fishing, is that bass are different every single day, and their mood and their personality changes every single day. Sometimes they want it fast, sometimes they want it slow, sometimes they want it in between. Another myth that I found out in wintertime fishing is I had a friend of mine that goes fishing with his old man all the time, like down at Table Rock and here at the Ozark Lakes. And this old man, all he does is fish a popper. That's the only bait he fishes 12 months out of the year. And my buddy told me while he was fishing a jerkbait in like 44-degree water, this friend of his would be throwing a popper and he'd wind up catching 2 or 3 on it in the middle of the winter, like 40-some degree weather. So bass, the biggest thing that you need to remember as far as this bass movement and all that, personalities in the wintertime, bass are a lot more aggressive than what you think they are. So as a result of that, try to start fishing some faster lures, like try to fish crankbaits, maybe go to a spinnerbait, possibly even a chatterbait. Let the fish tell you if they want it slow or fast. Don't really, overthink it. But I can tell you one thing about it. It's like, one thing I found out about cold weather fishing and wintertime fishing is that in general, a lot of it has to do with the water clarity in terms of how fast you fish. The cleaner the water, even if the water is really cold, the faster that you can fish the bait. The dirtier the water, if you got more off-colored water, that's when you really have to slow it down. When I'm fishing in the wintertime and that water temperature is in the 40s, I still fish my jerk baits at a pretty good clip. I don't let them rest very long. I let them rest for maybe a second or two, and I keep it moving, trying to hunt those aggressive fish. But if I'm fishing in more off-colored water, let's say if I go down to Grand Lake in January and the water visibility is 2 feet, I may let it pause a lot longer because those fish need time to locate that bass or locate that lure in a little bit more off-colored water. So that's one of the biggest things with that. Now, moving up into the springtime of the year, the spring transition is really a funny deal because it takes place very gradually, yet at the same time, you can have rapid changes depending upon weather patterns. One of the things I found out about bass fishing is that weather patterns affect the bass more in the springtime of the year than any other time of year. It's like when you have a cold front that comes through, or you have a bright day or a cloudy day or a windy day or a calm day, there's not another time of year that it has a bigger impact on either shutting bass down or making them active than you do in the springtime of the year. And when I'm talking about the spring, I'm talking about when those water temperatures are between like 50 and 70 degrees. That's the springtime, which is usually, depending upon what part of the country you're in, it can be anywhere between February to May. But when you're talking about water temperatures and that in the springtime of the year, the techniques that you fish are really going to be dictated by the weather patterns, because there's not a single other time of year that is true. It's like when you get a prefrontal condition, like say, for example, a front's on the way and you've got a steady or a falling barometric pressure and you got some clouds starting to move in, that triggers those fish and they get super active. And that combination of the water temperature, the time of the year, the fish are getting ready to spawn, they've got some internal primal instinct within inside of them to start feeding up in preparation for all the stresses that spawn puts on them, and they get really aggressive. That's why if you fish like when that water temperature is in the 50s, like especially between like say 55 to 58, 59 degrees, and you get one of those days where it's cloudy, a little bit windy, maybe a little bit warm, a lot of humidity in the air, you can expect to have a good day fishing. That's the That's the best time of year to fish, is if you have those conditions. On the flip side of the coin, let's say, for example, you get those conditions in the springtime of the year and you catch them really good one day, and then all of a sudden that front passes through, and then your barometric pressure starts rising, the sky clears out and gets bluebird, the wind switches to the north, you have a temperature drop, the fish really shut down. It has a bigger impact on them than about any other time of the year when they do that. And one of the things you can do in correlation to that, it's like you can fish those aggressive power fishing baits prior to a front, and after that front goes through, a lot of times you need to slow down, shaky head, Ned rig, jig, something to fish on the bottom, with the exception if the wind keeps blowing. Some fronts that come through in the springtime of the year, they still have a lot of wind behind them. And if you do have wind behind them, even if it's colder, you can still catch them on a reaction bait as long as that wind is there. So that's some of the things that I have found about it, more than anything else. Now, when those fish actually start spawning, let's say, for example, those fish are in the zone to ready to start spawning. They're either looking for beds, they're building beds, they're spawning, they're guarding fry, sort of that 3 to 4 week period in that time of year. That is the time of year when bass do not want to chase very far. The only time they're chasing is to chase something off their bed. They'll chase something 2 or 3 feet off the bed, then they're right back on that bed. And like I said, not all those fish are spawning at the same time. If you got some fish that you see up on bed spawning, which you should just let them spawn, guys. One of the things that I always suggest is don't jack with fish that are trying to spawn. Just let them do their deal, get past it. But if you're fishing that time of year, doesn't matter if you can see fish or not see fish or whatever, but anytime that water temperature is around 60 degrees, 60 to 65 degrees in the spring, there's gonna be fish spawning, whether you can see them or not. And the best way to catch fish during that time of year is you need to fish on the bottom slope. Bass do not want to chase during that time frame. It's very, very difficult to catch a fish on top, with a moving bait. That's why, like a Texas rig worm, a creature bait, a Texas rig lizard, a Senko, drop shot, shaky head, all that is really good when that water temperature is in that low 60s. My favorite bait's a shaky head. I mean, anytime in the springtime of the year, if those fish are anywhere close to spawning or getting done with spawning, I catch a lot of fish on a shaky head. So that transition gradually leads into the post-spawn, which is the later spring, which is usually May to early part of June for most type of lakes. And one of the things you're going to find out about the post-spawn, early on in the post-spawn, guys, there's still a ton of shallow fish. It's like when those fish gets done spawning, they just don't immediately swim out to deep water unless you're on a river lake, like the TVA lakes. That is the one exception to the rule. All you guys that fish Watts Bar, Chickamauga, Gunnersville, Kentucky Lake, all those TVA lakes, I've never seen in my life how quick fish move from spawning out to deeper water like they do there. But traditional man-made lakes, you have this very gradual transition. And that transition does not have as much to do with water temperature as it does with the increasing daylight hours. Because as you get into May and June, you're talking about some of the longest daylight hours of the year. And that, as those daylight hours increase, as summer gets closer, June 22nd, those fish will gradually start moving out and dispersing through the lake, shallow, deep, mid depths. But in the post-spawn, like for the first 3 weeks after the fish get done spawning, there is a lot of what I call cruising bass. Now, bass will cruise a lot after they get done spawning for a lot of different reasons. They're guarding fry, they're recuperating, they're looking for food. You see a lot of fish just swimming around during the month of May, if you can see them. But some of the best lures that you have in the month of May, it's the direct opposite from when those fish are spawning. That's when I go back to the moving lures, but I go back to the shallow moving lures. This is the great time of year to fish any type of a topwater bait. A swim jig is really good that time of year. Chatterbait, spinnerbait, shallow running crankbait, any of those lures that run horizontal through the water column in shallow water. And then you start getting into the summertime. So I'm gonna take a quick break here, guys. We'll get back into the summer. Okay, guys, we're back. Let's get into a little bit about what I figured out about bass the rest of the year, summer and fall time. just like anything else, every single season, I have found out that there's a lot of misconceptions as far as what the fish do and don't do. One of the things that you hear about in the summertime that I have figured out is that, you know, bass don't bite as good when it's hot. They get sluggish. They don't bite as good. You have to fish deep for them. That's one of the biggest things that I have figured out that simply wasn't true. It's like shallow fishing in the summertime is just as good as it is any time of the year. There's always fish that live shallow in the summertime of the year. And one of the things that I have found out about bass in general, as far as how they are, is that every single bass in a lake, it is just like human beings. It's like everybody has a different personality. You know, some people, you know, love spaghetti and meatballs. Other people can't stand it. You know, some people love to live out in the country. Other people, you know, want to live in New York City. I've got, you know, a friend of mine that lives right literally within a block of Central Park in New York City. I would consider that a living hell if I had to live in New York City by Central Park, but they love it up there and they couldn't stand living in the country. So bass are the same way. And one of the things that you'll find out about that personality of the fish, there's not any other time of the year that is more obvious than the summertime of the year, as far as moods and personalities of fish and how they do different things. One of the biggest mysteries in my life is like, why in the summertime of the year that you'll have one bass, say you've got a 3-pound bass, that there's a stump in the back end of some creek that's got some stained water in it, and this stump is in 3 foot of water, and that fish will spend its life within 100 foot of that stump and 3 foot of water. It'll stay there all summer. It'll stay literally all summer around that stump. And then you have another bass that lives out in open water and chases shad out over 200 foot of water all summer long. And then you've got another bass that may live on a main lake point next to a rock in 10 foot of water. It's like, what is it that makes bass do so many different things? And that's one of the things that I have figured out about bass, is that you can't lump them all together. You can never say, okay, this is what the fish are doing in the lake. You have to almost look at fish like they're individual people, individual personalities. And given that, they can literally be anywhere. That's one of the things you'll find out about summertime fishing, is bass can be anywhere. They can be in a foot of water. They can be in 30 foot of water. They can be suspended 5 foot down over 100 foot of water. They're literally, you know, can be anywhere in the water column. So here's a couple things that will help you out in your summer fishing. Now, a lot of this just depends on, just like bass, you're going to be, people like to fish differently. You have to decide how you want to fish. If you like fishing offshore, there's going to be things for you to do offshore. If you like fishing shallow, you don't have to fish offshore. There's plenty of things for you to do, you know, up shallow. But one of the things that I have found out more than anything else is that in the summertime of the year, you're going to catch your smaller fish if you think you got to get out there early in the morning. You hear people say all the time, oh, we got to get out there to get the early bite. The early bite is the most biggest myth in fishing. Most of the fish you're going to catch early in the morning in the summertime of the year are not going to be near as big as the ones you catch up in the middle of the day. One of the things about it is that the benefit of fishing up in the day a little bit when it's hot in the summertime of the year is it tends to position the fish. And summertime bass are really, really finicky about how they position around cover, because in the summertime, if you're fishing shallow, shade is the #1 element. It's like by far shade is the key, and shade changes all the time. As far as where the shade is going to be at different angles at different times. And one of the reasons that summertime fishing is good up in the middle of the day in shallow water is the smaller your shade pocket gets, the more it positions that fish. So in other words, what we're talking about, let's say, for example, we go back to that stump I just said in the back of the creek. If you go back to that stump at 7 o'clock in the morning, it's going to be shady everywhere back there. And that fish could be roaming anywhere. If you go back to that stump at 10 o'clock in the morning, there could be a shade line that extends out 5 or 6 feet from that stump. If you come back to that stump at 1 o'clock in the afternoon when that sun's up high, that shade line could be reduced to maybe a foot around that stump. That is where that fish is going to be. They're going to be positioned in that tight shade spot. And that's why, you know, I like fishing during the middle of the day. It really isolates where the fish are going to be better than anything. Now, the difference between, in the summertime of the year, between fishing deep and shallow is that you're concerned about specific bass positioning in the shallow water in the summertime, like around objects and around shade and that type of stuff. But if you're fishing deep, if you're fishing for suspended fish or out off the bank deep, the shade is not a factor. There are bite windows that occur in the summertime for those fish that are out deep. And most of the time, those bite windows are up in the middle of the day. When those, let's say for example, if you're a bass and you're living out off the end of a main lake point and there's a brush pile out on that point in 30 foot of water. Now, it's just like what I talked about when Johnny saw the shad school out there. During the day, if that bass is living next to that stump or that shallow brush pile out there, there's going to be feeding windows where that fish actually moves up on top of that brush pile, gets some shad that are swimming up there, maybe swims up a little shallower on the point and gets a crawdad. But those bite windows usually occur from about 10 o'clock in the morning until about 2 o'clock in the afternoon. So you're not concerned about the fish positioning around specific cover in shallow water or around shade. You want to be there during that prime bite window. Another thing that will trigger that bite window in the summertime of the year in deep fish is some wind. If you got a south wind like at 15 or 20 miles an hour, that's going to really help out a lot. It's like a little bit of wind will generate, those fish to bite in deeper water, because what that wind does, if you got a brush pile out on the end of that point and you got a 15 or 20 mile an hour wind coming across that point, it's creating some current on that point. And that's going to really activate and generate the strikes more. And that's why, if you're on a lake that has current in it, like a river type lake, the fishing's always better during the prime generation periods. So main thing about what I found out about summer fish, guys, more than anything else, more than any other time of the year, is they really have distinct personalities based upon, where you want to fish for them and that type of thing. Another thing you're going to find out about in the summertime of the year, the bass really prefer shad colored lures more. It's like I fish, shad pattern crankbaits, shad pattern chatterbaits, shad pattern spinnerbaits. A lot of times my jigs are a shad pattern swim jig. They really like that shad pattern in the summertime. So take a quick break here, guys, and we'll be right back and we'll get into the fall time of the year. Okay, guys, here's what I found out about bass in the fall time of the year. The fall is my second favorite time of the year to fish in terms of catching fish. My number one time to fish in the year, like everybody else, is in the spring time of the year. Second time of the year is in the fall time, especially in late fall. Late fall is the fish get a lot more active. They're a lot more fun to catch. It's really fun fishing in the fall because it's cooling off a little bit. There's a lot of neat colors, the leaves are changing. I really like the vibe and the energy of it. So here's what I found out about fall fishing. I'll talk a little bit about the myth on fall fishing. One of the things that I heard from everybody, when I started bass fishing was, in the fall time of the year, the fish start to migrate to the back of the creeks. I call BS on that. Yeah, there are gonna be some fish back there, but guys, in the fall time of the year, I have found out that the main lake is the place to be. By far, I catch more fish on the main lake than anywhere out there. And it's just like we talked about in other, parts of the video here, that every fish is unique to itself. But I can tell you for sure, during the fall time of the year, when that water temperature starts to drop, main lake is the place to be. Now, what happens to the bass this time of year, in my own experience, is this transition, again, like the springtime of the year, it takes place slowly, and then there's a major move that is usually triggered by a significant weather event in the fall time of the year. So here's usually what you have from my experience in fishing. September is usually pretty hot, throughout most part of the country, as is even in the first part of October. But what happens about the mid to the late part of October, you usually have your first major front of the fall time that brings in a lot of cool air with it. There's always that first front that comes through. It's usually the mid to late October. You get that bad front that comes through. It brings the temperatures down, maybe down to near freezing sometimes. And once the fish don't do much different up until that happens. Once that first major front comes through, you usually don't return to the pre-front conditions. In other words, you may have this Indian summer going on. It can be in the 70s and 80s consistently. And then once that big front comes through, you see nighttime temperatures start dropping. You see your daytime temperatures start to slow down a little bit. You have a little bit of change in the light intensity because the daylight hours are getting shorter. And this is another factor to remember, guys, as you get into the fall time of the year, like late fall, we're starting to get into the shortest daylight hours of the year. I mean, December 22nd is the shortest day of the year, which is still considered fall up to that point. And the fish just react different than any other time. So once that bad front comes through, you start to have a big change within the fish. And that change is a positive thing because it really activates them. It activates those fish to move shallow and start biting better shallow. And the thing that I have figured out more than anything else about fishing in the fall time of the year is wind plays a huge factor. We talked about temperature and weather patterns being a big factor in the springtime, like in the pre-spawn, but in the fall time of the year, the wind speed has a major factor on the activity of the fish and how you want to dictate your day. If you have wind in the fall and you have the water temperature start falling down into the 50s and 60s, that is a major activation point. And when you get that situation, guys, pick you up a small spinnerbait with small willow leaf blades on it and cover water. When that water temperature gets down close to 60 and you start getting some clouds, you start getting some wind, especially if you have a little bit of clean water, you can take that little spinnerbait and you can just burn the bank with it, concentrate on shady banks, concentrate on rocky banks, keep that spinnerbait like an inch under the surface, and it is a great way to catch them in the fall time of the year. Bass like to chase in the fall time. This is the time of year where I catch a lot of fish on my moving baits, like my spinner baits, my moving topwaters, buzz baits, swim baits, glide baits. Another thing about how bass mood, their mood and their personality changes is something switches when that water temperature gets in the mid to upper 50s and around 60 in the fall. And that's when they start biting those big baits, like the big glide baits and swim baits. Great time of year to fish them, especially if you have wind. But a lot of it is like, people say, well, the bass are feeding up because the winter's coming. I don't believe that at all, because bass don't feed up and just to get to the winter time and stop biting, because we talked about that before, is they feed all winter, they feed all winter long. But what happens is there's another mysterious element in fishing that causes fish to want a different size of lure, a different presentation, and that factor changes with the length of the daylight hours, the water temperature, the sunlight angles, the water clarity, the water level. A lot of times in the fall time of the year, you have a lot of stuff going on. You have the water level starting to fall. The water clarity usually starts clearing up a little bit. The water temperatures start dropping a little bit. Your daylight hours get shorter, which creates a different sunlight angle. And all those factors combined, we theorize on why or why not something should work, but that has a factor in it. And one thing I know about fishing in the fall time of the year is when you get all those factors coming together, dropping water level, clear water, dropping water temperature, all that stuff together, they like larger baits. Big spinner baits, big glide baits, big swim baits, big buzz baits. My square bill crankbaits, I go to the 3-inch size, and this is going to continue until that water temperature starts dropping into the low 50s and below 50. And once that happens, then we just continue the cycle, and the small stuff works good, the finessey stuff. So anyway, guys, that's just sort of a wide-ranging, some stuff off the top of my head that you might file away, probably help you down the road a little bit. And it's never ending, man. I'm telling you guys that one of the things about bass fishing, you're never going to know it all. You're never going to learn it all, and you don't want to know it all. That's one of the things, you guys that have watched me a lot on the channel, and you hear me talking about anti-technology and anti-live scope and all that type of stuff. One of the reasons I talk about that, guys, is the magic that surrounds fishing is the unknown. So you don't ever get to the point where you think that you want to learn everything and that you need to know everything, because you don't. Keep something a mystery, keep something unknown, keep something making you guess and puzzle all the time. That is what is special about fishing. And just think about that. Try to absorb that thought a little bit, and it really will deepen up your appreciation for what fishing really is. So anyway, guys, hope you enjoyed the seminar, and we'll check in later. See you guys.